Indie horror in its purest form is merely horror on a budget. While the genre has become associated with specific tropes, indie horror has shown itself in many forms outside of what you'd expect, especially in gaming. Because the indie horror scene in gaming has grown exponentially in the past decade, the criteria for ranking these will be as follows. 1. It's the chief theme of the game to invoke fear. Anything is on the table as long as the game's main focus is to scare you. 2. The gameplay experience itself. How effective is it at eliciting emotional highs of both fear and fun? 3. What does each game bring to the table? Beauty and simplicity is the name of the game here. The more a game can do with its shoestring budget, the better. 4. How well does the game handle its specific concept, premise, and type of horror and gameplay? Also, because there are a lot of indie horror games out there, we had to narrow it down to the ones that stood out the most, so it's inevitable we're leaving out a handful of fan favorites. Lastly, because this is horror, expect some really disturbing topics to be discussed throughout this video. Viewer discretion is most certainly advised. Mascot horror, a subgenre of indie horror that's a passion for many and a bane for others. Sure, killer mascots, toys, and cartoons are fun ideas that have been handled well. It's just that they all fall into the same design formulas over and over again to the point where it's kind of nauseating. We've reached a point where amateur devs are capitalizing on those to get some quick notoriety while doing very little to actually put out something worth our time and purchase. That said, let's talk about My Friendly Neighborhood. What sets Skim apart from the others is that, for one, it's a complete package, and 2, there's a lot more to the game than just walking around and waiting for something to pop out. There's actually gunplay here. It gives you a way to fight off enemies while still keeping things tense as the game limits your hand with a grid-based inventory management. See, there are other games to take inspiration from outside of the subgenre. The tone of the game leads more towards soft comedy horror, where a lot of the humor comes from the personalities of these wacky puppets heavily inspired by Jim Henson's work. It's surprising how well these translate into horror while still maintaining the same kind of charm, especially since you can actually choose to help some of these puppets if you want to. On top of that, the story is also unique. We don't just get another crazy experiment that turns the mascots into monsters. These puppets are alive and the game treats it like normal. But it's because they're alive that we get to learn how they were affected by the world around them, and took some drastic measures to stay relevant. Behind all the charm, there's still dread and sorrow looming over this felt-stitched neighborhood. The reason this game is at the bottom is it's more tragic than scary. So the other entries have much stronger horror elements in comparison. Still, in a subgenre oversaturated by chapter-based releases, walking simulators, and bad jump scares, it's very refreshing to have a one-and-done game that did a ton to stand on its own furry legs. Few games can boast the pedigree of popularizing a subgenre, let alone single-handedly creating one. Among their sacred ranks is Niki. Niki's gameplay and concept are incredibly simple. You explore the elaborate dream world of Medatsky. The enemies you encounter aren't so much as threatening as they are just weird. Most of the horror comes not from dangerous enemies and situations, but more from the surreal atmosphere. Most of the time you're just slightly off-put as opposed to actually terrified. But when the scares hit, they hit hard. Niki developed a cult following and gave birth to tons of fan games. More importantly, it was the first of what we know now as the RPG Maker horror game. It completely challenged the notion of what a game made in the engine could be like. Dozens of games, including ones on this list, were made thanks to it. Of course, going back to it these days is a different story. More often than not, you're just aimlessly wandering around overly large maps, hoping to find something weird.
I'm so bored. I just wish something supernatural would happen right now.
It's definitely on the list of games that I respect more than I actively like. A big component of horror is the surprise factor. The less assuming a game is, the more your guard is down. The more effective the scares are gonna be when the ball is rolling and any sense of comfort is absolutely shattered. So what better genre to place a horror game in as the dating sim? That's right, we're talking about the one, the only, Model Employee. Huh? Yeah, Doki Doki has kind of a pacing issue where the two sides don't really blend together all that well, and the disclaimer at the start can end up cheapening the major blows it hits you with. So instead, here's something you've probably never heard of before. Model Employee sees you in the cyberpunk dystopia of 2086, having just gotten an injury requiring you to get some cybernetic enhancements. Unfortunately for you, this means you're now saddled with medical bills and need to work to pay them off. Lucky for you, the massive corporation Tethys is always hiring for their warehouses. Imagine getting a job for a city-sized Amazon warehouse that you have to sleep in, and the dystopia starts to set in. But oh, it gets far worse, as the AI assistant Penny takes a particular liking to you. Penny's this game's Monica, and the game goes really far to show how utterly toxic her relationship with you is. Being an AI, she's able to tap into your cybernetics to help you do your job better. Pay no mind to her railroading you down certain paths or shifting around your UI to get rid of distractions to your work and visiting you every night to, comfort you. And without giving too much away, Penny's control of you for the greater good of the workplace becomes very subjective, and she doesn't really care about your fellow employees or any of your relationships within. Model Employee mixes this with themes of toxic workplace environments that really hit when looking at our modern world. I don't want to give away every trick this game pulls, but suffice to say, it messes with you hard. Seriously, the game is short and free. I implore you to check it out if you're a fan of psychological horror. With the world we live in now, a future controlled by faceless corporations and the AI algorithms is getting increasingly relevant. And this game takes advantage of that to make the scares hit to the fullest. Real people are always better than AI girlfriends, everyone. When will people realize this? Much like mascot horror, there's an abundance of RPG Maker horrors with stories that go into grotesque and graphic elements. While these games are great, they also end up being a bit samey, with most of the horror being carried by gore, jump scares, and chasers. No, we're looking for something a tad more subtle, something more character-driven that's able to hit the sweet spot between crude and clever. We need... Oh yeah, I'm serious. The Coffin of Andy and Laylee doesn't look like much on the surface, just a visual novel with minimal gameplay plus a dose of violence and gore here and there. But once you actually dive into it, you see exactly what makes it so outstanding. These two freaks of nature. Andrew and Ashley Graves started off as a fairly normal pair of siblings held in excessive quarantine to the point of starvation. They're a little moody and edgy, but you do sympathize with them given their situation. But then you see the lengths they go through to survive, what they were like in the past, and yeah, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. These two are awful. They're murderers, cannibals, gaslighters, demonic dealers, and just overall psychopaths. That said, they're very well written. They have qualities and interests that make them feel human and not just be urban spook cartoon yanderes.
Why have you forsaken me?
Ashley isn't just a perfect, cunning gaslighter. She lacks book smarts and is overconfident to a detriment, but she gets around by making the most out of what she's good at, keeping Andrew on a leash and making him dirty his hands for her. Andrew isn't just an innocent victim of gaslighting either. He's a pragmatic a-hole who keeps trying to rationalize doing terrible things, despite the fact that he's foregoing empathy for others just to stand up for his sister. No matter how often he blames Ashley for it, he continues to willingly do her bidding anyway because he never has the integrity to turn against her. He's the embodiment of the phrase, actions speak louder than words. Being a psychological thriller, the interaction between these two gets extremely nerve-wracking as the games go on. It really feels like they're on the verge of killing each other, but constantly having to justify keeping each other alive. We hate these two, and we want them to face justice for their actions, but they're so interesting to follow that we can't take our eyes off of them. Gotta give the game credit for really nailing the gothic vibe, not just in terms of art style, but the sensitive story elements as well. It's not afraid to get dark and dirty, but is still subdued enough that it feels adequately edgy, whether it's drama or humor. As of making this list, episode 3 isn't out yet, so whether these two will live, die, or if Andrew will face some kind of redemption, it's up in the air. Whatever we may get, it's going to be interesting to witness the excessive moral debate that comes out of it. I mean, can't be worse than Edelgard. Due to the restrictive nature of RPG Maker, most people find a greater avenue in just making survival or visual novel horror instead of using any of the battle mechanics. However, if you push your technical knowledge just a little further, you can still put out something interesting with many tools this engine gives you. That's precisely what Fear and Hunger did. At first, this game seems like a standard RPG with some neat targeting mechanics, but you'll quickly realize that being good at battling can only get you so far, as the enemies get super strong and super tough almost immediately. And there's permadeath. No, this game is an immersive sim. You go around looking for items to help you survive these accursed dungeons, crafting equipment, trapping your enemies, you name it. As if that's not enough, you have hunger and phobias to worry about, and if you don't manage them, things are not going to get easier for you. But interactions aren't as easy as ABCs either. Coin tosses are a thing, and they can be a case of life and death during battles and exploration, so you're not even safe from a dose of RNG. Losing limbs can severely impair your ability to fight, and make sure you know which Eldritch God you're praying to, because you'll risk losing party members if you make the wrong move. Oh, but the game isn't so gentle as to just let you die for good sometimes. Sometimes you have to live through your death for minutes on end just to face an even worse fate than what you normally get. Yeah, there's a reason I hesitated to talk about this game for a while. Between being very graphic and suggestive, the tough gameplay, and the insanely creepy atmosphere, this game is excellent at instilling dread. I can only guess someone thought Darkest Dungeon wasn't brutal enough, so they took it a hell of a step further to make this game a true nightmare. Although, I will admit, the more you put up with the excessive crudeness, it starts to feel less disturbing and more...
Ha! That creature has a dick! Oh, that is so funny!
Still more tasteful than some of the stuff Ultra Despair Girls and the Corpse Party sequels cook up. Besides, this ain't the first game that lets you target enemy dicks. Fallout did that first. Sometimes it's nice to rely on the game's ambiance to give us the willies. I'm happy to say that Little Nightmares gives us ambiance and then some. In this third-person puzzle survivor, we play as a little girl in a raincoat simply called Six. We find ourselves lost and alone in an enormous ocean liner, a majority of it surrounded in darkness. As we try to find our way out, we realize that we're not as alone on the ship as we thought. We got the usual rats and leeches running around, but also enormous, monstrous-looking people with an even bigger appetite for us. I get serious Spirited Away vibes from the monsters. Remember the scene where the parents turn into pigs? This is that, only somehow 80 times creepier. But there's also these pointy hat critters called gnomes hiding in the shadows. They're more scared of us than we are of them, but aw, you get to hug them along the way. That's pretty cute. To make it off this tub alive, you're gonna have to avoid the beastly passengers and rodents while using the environment to solve puzzles in your way. But there's another challenge. Our own appetite. Along the way, 6 experiences crippling hunger pains. You have to eat raw sausages and even rats to quiet your ailing stomach. Yeah, it ain't pleasant, but you can't afford to be picky here. It's all about survival, right? Aw, look, a friendly gnome wants to give you some food. Isn't that nice of him? The actual Arguably the only thing scarier than the ship or the monsters is Six herself. Throughout our quest, we see her go through a gruesome transformation from a frightened, lonely little girl into a ravenous, desperate scavenger. Her appetite gets increasingly monstrous by the hour until she's no different than the beast she's hiding from. The only difference being, she's still the same height. By the time you reach the actual big bad of the game and knock her out, dang, not even a moment of hesitation. Though, when you see how she acts in the prequel games, yeah, she was never an angel, to be honest. I think what sets Little Nightmares apart from other horror puzzle games like Limbo or Inside is the overall presentation. The stylistic imagery and unique monster designs blend supremely well with the atmosphere, and the world feels fleshed out but still vague enough to remain mysterious. While there's a bit of lore to digest with the other games, this title's story as a standalone isn't exactly complex because it doesn't need to be. The atmosphere itself sells the scares just as much as the actual threats, along with the horrifying realization that you're slowly losing yourself to the darkness, if you weren't there already. Remember how I praised the Stanley Parable for its philosophical story and how it made our choices matter? Now imagine that, but actual horror. Like, brilliantly done horror. Last year, the world was introduced to Slay the Princess, a hand-drawn visual novel where you're tasked with committing the titular dirty deed. Right off the bat, the art style is absolutely gorgeous. The backgrounds, the characters, everything is beautiful and expressive, really upping the creepy factor when things get unsettling. And trust me, they will. There are only 2 voice actors in the game, and yet there's a bazillion characters. Even if you close your eyes, you still know exactly who's speaking because they are just that crazy talented. Like the Stanley Parable, the outcome of the story is based entirely on our choices, and yet there is no clear answer. Yeah, you're supposed to slay the princess, the pushy, disembodied voice said so. But can he really be trusted? Can the princess be trusted? If we let her live, will we regret it? Will we regret it if we don't? Of course, more often than not, there's only one clear-cut answer.
Jimmy, you're thinking with your...
For real though, no matter what you choose in the first chapter, you'll end up Groundhog Daying back to the beginning. But based on your interactions the first time around, everything changes. The narrator's tone, the setting, and especially the princess. She could end up sweet, vindictive, cynical, something out of Legitimate Nightmares, and so on. The amount of contextual dialogue is insane. It personalizes to the player to such a crazy degree and can make you second guess every single decision. Overall, Slay the Princess is a brilliant game that really tailors itself to your choices. It's a comedy, a tragedy, a psychological horror all wrapped up in a nicely drawn package, but most of all, a love story. A word of warning, your first decision could reflect yourself as a person, so good luck dealing with the consequences when everything hits the fan. Told you it was psychological horror.
become your new queen.
At this point, I can't imagine a world where I would make a top 10 indie horror games list without talking about the genre's flagship franchise, Five Nights at Freddy's. If we were ranking this list based on influence alone, FNaF would have a comfy seat at the top. That said, I don't think it would be fair to compare everything we've talked about so far to what has expanded into a multi-million-dollar franchise. So, let's take an objective look at the original game from 2014, shall we? For those who have been living under a rock and without the internet, or your frontal lobe, the initial concept of FNaF 1 is fairly simple. You're a security guard working the night shift, and there are animatronics that want to stuff you into a suit, which turns out will kill you, so you have to fend them off, blah blah blah. There's a movie about it starring PETA from the Hunger Games and Shaggy.
Are you challenging me?
Now, that may sound like too simple of a concept to warrant any scares, but remember that what you can do with the little you have is the beauty of the indie horror genre. Simple doesn't always mean bad, and complex doesn't always mean good. Trust me, FNaF tried to go AAA in 2021 with Security Breach, and look at how that turned out.
We're gonna go down to parts and services, and I'm gonna shove a beak inside of you, and you are going to be able to talk better. Did you hate the idea that much? Please, give me in, Friday!
All that's to say that FNaF is plenty scary as it is. We as gamers are so used to walking around in games at this point, so being confined to only our chair as we attempt to fend off these killer animatronics with nothing more than lights and doors, it's pretty stress-inducing. Just turn off the lights in your gaming lair and tell me you aren't fully immersed in this experience. Sure, we've all grown numb to jump scares at this point, and that's probably FNaF's fault. But to FNaF's credit, it gives us a rare example of jump scares being done correctly. They're the punishment, and our goal is to avoid them. Believe me, that's a lot better than a game just throwing a random jump scare at you because haha, funny. Even when you know a jump scare is coming after you kept the doors closed for too long, because let's face it, we've all done that on our first playthrough, just waiting for it to happen can elicit so much anxiety, whether you're playing the game yourself or watching someone else play it. Speaking of which, this leads us nicely to the big reason FNaF finds itself this high: the impact. The original Five Nights at Freddy's played a huge role in bringing Let's Play culture into the mainstream media. YouTubers like Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, Yamamash, Dawko, and of course, MatPat all gained their influence and made millions off of this game. Heck, FNaF's developer Scott Cawthon himself made $26 million during the franchise's first 2 years. And he absolutely deserves it. Scott made FNaF during a time when he was ready to completely give up on game development on account of his pre-FNaF games being, well, not good. FNaF was meant to be the last game of his career, and since its release, there have been several sequels and spin-offs, and several books including 2 encyclopedias, oh, and a haunted house attraction in Las Vegas, oh, a feature-length film that's getting a sequel next year, oh, and all the freaking fan games. Am I missing anything?
The merchandise?
The music made by the fans?
The theories made by the fans?
Does Willis Wonderland count?
Five Nights at Freddy's is having its 10th birthday this year, and that milestone is absolutely worth celebrating. This game didn't just make a small contribution to a subgenre or chase any kind of trend. It changed media culture as a whole. With all that being said, why is it only number 3?
I thought it was number 1.
Don't get me wrong, the fact that the first FNaF game led to a culturally defining success is remarkable. But I think the top 2 games are scarier. You guys know by now that FNaF's jump scares, while effectively executed, don't really do it for me.
Huh, you got me.
Plus, even if you were scared by the original FNaF when it first came out, it's kinda goofy in hindsight. It's not like the game deals with any hard-hitting subjects that may warrant a trigger warning for anyone wanting to play it. Speaking of which, remember Remember Hereditary, the 2018 indie horror film that dealt with topics like grief, familial trauma, and how to scar an audience for life? You may recall the events of that film all began thanks to an incident in which the family's oldest child accidentally kills his little sister. Now, all you have to do is reverse the roles, replace Alex Wolff with an emo anime protag, and you got Amori. In this horror RPG, you play as the title character Amori, who has been living in white space for as long as he can remember. Occasionally, he will leave white space to hang out with his group of friends as they embark on a never-ending journey to find his best friend, Basil. Your friend group consists of a charming pretty boy hero, his boisterous little brother Kel, who's constantly arguing with Aubrey, and Amori's big sister Mari, the team mom who provides save points and snacks. Gameplay-wise, Amori plays like any other turn-based RPG, only this game has attacks that can make your enemies or your party members feel sad, angry, or happy. These emotions have effect on both an attack's speed and damage, as well as the afflicted party's defense level. Finally got an RPG where your party members can deal your enemies a heaping helping of
Emotional damage!
Oh, and speaking of which, that leads us nicely to the story of Amori.
I'm a brave boy. Not a brave enough boy for this!
Remember how Doki Doki Literature Club gave the player a false sense of security in its first half, only to spring on you that it's a horror game? Yeah, Amori takes that concept and runs a marathon with it. One moment you and your buddies are fighting against a variety of colorful bosses, the next you start seeing shadow figures that resemble your best friend, and the only way out of white space is to... I think I want the killer animatronics back. After that, the actual premise of the game starts to become clear. As it turns out, Amori isn't actually your real name. Your real name is Sunny. And throughout the game, you switch between the comfort of white space and your cruel, harsh reality. Oh sure, all your friends are here in the real world, and even Basil appears to be alive and well. But unfortunately, the same can't be said for Mari. As you'd expect, the effect Mari's death had on her friends was total devastation. Hero, who was Mari's boyfriend before she died, disappeared into his studies while his little brother Kel disappeared into sports. Aubrey was left to grieve on her own, and the resentment she harbored led to her becoming a stereotypical mean girl. And yet, she's the only one who managed to find Jesus. As for Sunny and Basil, well, they've been hurting the most. Sunny created Amori and Whitespace to disassociate himself from the truth of Mari's death, revealed to us in photos when we finally enter Black Space. Mari and Sunny had an argument over their recital, and when it got physical, Sunny ended up pushing Mari down the stairs. Unaware of his strength, Sunny rushed down to check on her, but it was too late. Sunny couldn't bear to tell his friends, so he tied some rope together and hung Mari's body from a tree to make it look like she did it herself. Afterwards, he pushed away his friends and sunk into his unforgiveness. Basil didn't fare much better as he bore witness to everything. Worse yet, Amori had broken his promise to Basil that they'd always be there for each other by locking himself away. He felt so betrayed by this that he responded by not only isolating himself too, but by blacking out all the photos he took of him and his friends. The memory's too painful for him to look upon. Then Basil got his photo album forcibly swiped from him by Aubrey, not realizing that she wanted to wash the black marker off the photos. All of this is some of the most disturbing stuff we've gotten from indie horror in a while. Thankfully, all is not lost. Choose the good ending, and you'll come across Mari in a vision where she asks you to forgive yourself for what happened. After all, your friends forgive you. Just because you did something bad doesn't mean that you're bad. We all make mistakes, and we can either run from them or choose to forgive ourselves and move on. Words cannot express how profound of an experience this game is. From its gorgeous art style, equally gorgeous soundtrack, and the way it seamlessly switches tones to give the player the emotional roller coaster of a lifetime, it's also kind of refreshing to see the indie horror genre dive into more elevated horror like that of A24. It's a top-tier horror game from start to finish, even if it didn't make as viral of an impact as FNaF, or our pick for number 1. Wilson's Heart. I am begging you all to try this if you have a VR headset and love classic horror. Doki Doki Literature Club. The meta horror is on point, but it's a one-trick pony otherwise. Fran Bow, a charming little picture book adventure about demons and psychosis. Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion, proof that being loud and obnoxious can get you places. Bendy and the Ink Machine. I can't wait to show you the fruits of my isolation complex, huh? Mad Father. The older versions are scarier. Subnautica. What a relaxing survival game. Get away, get away! Faith. Atari is more religious than I remember. The Witch's House. A solid survival horror for RPG Maker, even if it is mostly a jump scare fest. Iron Lung. Must not reference Ocean Gate. Perfect Vermin. Who'd have thought a game about smashing furniture could be an effective metaphor for cancer? The Mortuary Assistant.
Piss off, Nana. I'm trying to find a stapler.
Okay, guys, so I can't help but feel like we're forgetting about a particular indie horror game that belongs here at number 1. Isn't there a word for forgetting something and no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to remember what it was? Is it like a condition or something? Oh, now I remember. Incontinent! Okay, I've had my fun, but I'd like to set the scene for you. It's the late 2000s. Horror games are...
I'm the light bringer! I'm the universe!
Not doing great, let's be honest. But then the 2010s roll in, and with it comes a new beacon of darkness to shake up the horror community in the best ways. Amnesia, The Dark Descent. The story tells of a young man named Daniel, waking up in the dreary castle with no memory of anything other than his name and place of origin. As he wanders helplessly through the castle, he finds pages of a diary written by himself revealing that he deliberately wiped his own brain and must traverse the darkened halls to eliminate the castle's evil baron, Alexander. But tread lightly, fair travelers, for he is being haunted by a mysterious force dubbed the Shadow, and Alexander's minions are roaming the castle under the cover of night. Before now, horror games kinda threw you a bone, making sure you were armed to fight spookums and chew bubblegum. But Amnesia decided,
You're on your own, sonny!
no weapons in this castle. Your only hope is to run and hide. Stay out of sight, put some distance between you and the beasties in the dark. Of course, that's going to be harder than you think, thanks to this game's other biggest innovation, the sanity meter. Rather than your typical health meter, Dark Descent features an additional one for your mental state. It's most affected when you stare at a monster or wander around in the dark too long. The lower your sanity is, the more the world around you distorts and blurs. You can replenish your sanity in the light, but it puts you at risk of being spotted by enemies, and staring at them only makes your sanity worse. Okay, so they're a lot scarier when you don't see them, but the fear's still there. Considering you'll be wandering through the dark to avoid these beauties and solve puzzles, relying on the sound design is gonna help you a lot in the long run. On its own, Dark Descent is phenomenal. The gameplay and ambience are incredibly immersive, giving you a feeling of helplessness even when you're safe behind your computer desk. But arguably, the only thing bigger than the game itself was the reactions. Most don't remember the core game story, but one thing people do remember about Amnesia is the custom maps. People in the Steam community went ham with making custom stories and levels for the Dark Descent, effectively making it the Minecraft of indie horror. Heck, these helped jumpstart big names in the YouTube gaming community like Markiplier and PewDiePie. Because face it, what's more fun than watching YouTubers jump in fright? Maybe that's why I'm not as popular as they are. Add to it, it changed the rules of the horror gaming community, inspiring more horror games that relied less on combat and more on ambiance and immersion. Many say that there are other games down the line that did what Dark Descent did better. And that's great. It means Amnesia walked so that these other games could run, preferably away from the ghoulies chasing us in the dark. More importantly, it made sure that the horror genre got more of the variety and creativity it deserves. I'm Josh Scorcher, and now I present to you the one thing scarier than any of these games combined. Hey everyone, this is Josh. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Please check out my other social media like my Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr. Check out my other channels such as Joshua Burner for reactions and other stuff, Dragon Fighter Gaming for tabletop, and Bob Equestria for cartoons. Consider checking below the video and donating to my Patreon, Streamlabs for my merchandise, or becoming a YouTube member. Thanks for watching.